What's up everyone, Alex here. The spooky season is here, and what better way to celebrate it than to talk about some truly dark JRPGs. Because if there's one thing that I have learned in all my years making videos here, is that you like dark things. And let me tell you, the games in this list are dark, and oftentimes disturbing. So here are 10 dark JRPGs for anyone looking for something macabre to play. The Shin Megami Tensei series is known for their darker edge, especially when compared to the somewhat lighter and more popular Persona series. While there are plenty of fantastic entries in the series to choose from, it's the third game that I keep coming back to whenever I want to experience its specific brand of atmospheric dread. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne is one of the most beloved entries in the franchise, and a big part of that has to do with how unique it felt at the time of its release. Not a lot of games, especially JRPGs, were able to create this perfect blend of apocalyptic grunge, mixed with a sense of style and foreboding darkness. Unlike other games where I can point to specific events that can push things over the edge, for Nocturne, it's more about the prevailing atmosphere than anything else. The music, visuals, and general tone of the game creates a potent and tangible vibe. While newer releases by Atlus still have a penchant for dark themes and storytelling, they tend to be balanced out with a good sense of levity. And while Nocturne does this as well to an extent, you can tell that the intention was to focus more on that sense of foreboding, giving it an unmistakable feel and cementing it as a truly dark JRPG. Going into OMORI blindly, I expected something cute, fun, and maybe a little sad at times. While all that turned out to be true, I didn't anticipate just how dark and disturbing this game could get. For long stretches of my playtime, it really just seemed like a quirky and adorable game about a group of friends exploring strange lands and getting into wacky adventures together. However, things are not quite what they seem. The nature of what these fantastical worlds actually are come into focus as you play further along, granting them a more melancholic feel. It becomes very clear that the protagonist is coping with a deep-rooted trauma, one that is not so easily resolved, and the way that it manifests for him can be both relatable and genuinely unnerving. What makes things hit harder, however, is eventually realizing that it wasn't just the main character who was deeply affected. Everyone he knew and loved have also been dealing with it in their own way. Now, I know I'm being vague here, but trust me, this is a game worth playing and seeing for yourself, so that you can fully understand what I'm talking about. OMORI is a beautiful experience. The art is simple yet unique, the music is incredible, and its characters lovable. Yet, despite all of that, the darkness that lurks underneath the game's cute exterior will shock you to your core. It might be surprising to see Vandal Hearts on this list, but the era it came out in was the time when games started gaining more freedom to push boundaries. While the game does have cartoonish geysers of blood every time an enemy is defeated, beyond that lies a fairly grim political drama. Along with the over-the-top violence, there's also tons of scheming and underhanded dealings that happen in the story. The antagonists in this game are shrewd, willing to backstab and betray anyone in their way to achieve their goals. This all makes for a pretty grim tale, one that contrasts in a unique way with the game's visual style. This could just be my nostalgia talking, but I find that its presentation actually enhances more than it distracts, in that this abstraction forces you to fill in the blanks with your imagination. Tactical RPGs tend to have a reputation for being rather dry political dramas, but Vandal Hearts is anything but, as it contains a lot of sharp writing amidst its dark tone and atmosphere, giving the game a unique flavor that helps it stand out amongst other games in the genre. For those who have never played it, Undertale might come across as an odd pick at first. Isn't that the meme game with the goofy skeletons? How dark can it possibly be? Pretty dark, believe it or not. Yes, the game does have a great sense of humor, and I laughed plenty of times through my multiple playthroughs. However, underneath the hype soundtrack and cute exterior lies a much darker experience than one might expect. Most infamous is the optional genocide run, wherein you can kill almost every NPC in the game, drastically altering the story in the process. No longer are you simply exploring the world and interacting with lovable monsters. Instead, towns are deserted, and you're treated with active disdain, and your own character's behavior becomes unsettling. This type of playthrough becomes a huge gut punch, particularly if done after doing a pacifist run, given that you've come to know and love all these characters, and now you're just slaughtering all of them. And now that I think about it, even that non-violent playthrough has its own disturbing plot revelations, showing that no matter what, darkness always lurks beneath the surface. If you've dismissed Undertale on the basis of it being that weird, quirky game that's nothing but fluff, you might want to reconsider, because it's so much more than what it might seem. Out of all of the games on this list, the original Shadow Hearts probably wears its dark themes on its sleeve the most. That's not to say that the game doesn't have moments of levity. In fact, the way the game perfectly balances its sense of tone so as to not wear out the player is a considerable feat. However, it can't be denied that this game definitely wants you to feel like something is off with its world, and the people in it. Part of why this works is because unlike other JRPGs that tend to take place in fantasy worlds, Shadow Hearts is actually an alternate history game that takes place during the early 1900s, adding to the game's uncanny look and feel. What also makes this game unique is that these darker elements extend into the gameplay as well. For instance, demon transformations aren't just for show. They're a unique ability for the protagonist and become a powerful asset in combat. On top of that, there's also an insanity meter tied to each character, causing party members to attack erratically if not managed properly. While the PS1 often gets lauded as a golden era for JRPGs, let's not forget that the PS2 has some absolute bangers like Shadow Hearts. Unlike the other indie games mentioned on this list, like Undertale and OMORI, Lisa the Painful is upfront about how dark and twisted it is. The game takes place in a post-apocalyptic world with only deranged men living in it. The protagonist has a substance abuse problem, and basically everyone you meet pretty much sucks. What keeps Lisa the Painful from being too much of a downer, however, is a dark sense of humor that's laced with every interaction and set piece. Even when I saw something pretty horrible happen, the game manages to frame it in a way that would get a huge laugh out of me. This balance of humor and darkness is what makes Lisa the Painful a fascinating game to get through. It's admittedly not always the most fun, almost as if it delights in the player's suffering and misfortune, but it's always engaging. For example, early on in the game, you're given a choice of whether or not you want to kill off a party member or keep everything in your inventory. And the problem is that this party member kinda sucks. This isn't a fake out either. This character will remain dead for the rest of the game. This choice, and many others like it, may not make for a comfortable decision for most, but these interactions will stick with you, as it gets across how dark and brutal this world is. Lisa the Painful truly lives up to its name in the best kind of way. Even when it's painful, it's memorable in ways few games manage to pull off. If the first Grandia could be described as a Ghibli movie turned into a JRPG, then Grandia II is absolutely a harder-edged 90s shonen anime, something in the vein of Yu Yu Hakusho. While the original Grandia was a fairly lighthearted adventure, its sequel decided to take things in a distinctly darker direction. It starts with our protagonist Ryudo, who is the polar opposite of the bright-eyed and innocent Justin. Ryudo is coldly cynical, and quick to dismiss and spew sarcastic remarks at nearly every character he interacts with. While the visuals still convey a lot of color and vibrance, the game is punctuated with some surprisingly morbid imagery at times, causing for an interesting contrast between how beautiful yet ugly the world can be. The deeper into the experience you get, the more you see how dark and twisted the world really is, betraying its initially welcoming exterior. In that sense, it makes Ryudo's disposition towards the world more believable. He's worldly, and has seen firsthand how people are not always how they seem, so he keeps everyone at a safe distance. It's interesting then to see his growth as a character, but also uncovering who the true villains of the game are, which in turn add even more context to what Ryudo's deal is. While I personally prefer the original Grandia by just a hair, Grandia II is an incredible title in its own right, and it's just as fun and memorable in its own distinct ways. I'm sure many of you are unfamiliar with Linda Cubed, and are asking yourselves, what the heck is this? Let me paint a quick picture for you then. Despite its distinctly stylistic visuals, it's genuinely one of the most insane and disturbing games I've ever played. Released only in Japan for the PC Engine and remade for the PS1, the latter version recently received a fan translation, which allowed English-speaking fans to finally play through it for the first time. Lisa Cube's story is a bizarre sci-fi take on Noah's Ark, as in the point of the game is to gather 2 of every animal before the end of the world. The game's tone is completely all over the place. At times, it feels like a silly 90s anime, with over-the-top expressions and reactions. Other times, the game is brutally dark, with creepy monster designs, not-so-subtle allusions to characters having intercourse, and just showing over-the-top blood and gore. No wonder this never got released outside of Japan. The game's art style is very unique, and adds to the game's darkly uncanny feel. And if the artwork looks familiar, that's because it was drawn by Tatsuyuki Tanaka, who worked on the anime classic Akira. Considering we never got this game in the West, and finally being able to play it thanks to its fan translation, I had no choice but to include it on this list. Some of the games in the Tale series might feature some dark elements here and there, but they generally tend to be well balanced as far as their tone is concerned, being both silly and serious when they need to be. This is not the case for Tales of Berseria. Right from the get-go, the main character goes through horrible trauma and spends nearly the rest of the game on a rampage-filled revenge plot as a result. While most JRPG party members tend to be a collection of well-meaning individuals, what's interesting about Berseria is that this instead feels like a band of anti-heroes. Thankfully, none of this comes across as edgy for edginess' sake, and the storytelling is a cut above the rest and manages to deliver one of the most compelling narratives in the entire series. On top of all of that, it never forgets that it's still a Tales game. While its tone is darker and heavier than the other games in the series, it still makes room for fun and silly segments, managing to balance its themes with sheer finesse. If you've been itching to give the Tales series a shot but were put off by how lighthearted they generally come across, Tales of Berseria is exactly what you've been waiting for. I remember playing the original Drakengard when it was released and expecting a typical fantasy action game, but what I got was anything but. While the gameplay was nothing special, what made Drakengard stand out was the insanely dark story and characters. Yoko Taro himself revealed that the inspiration for having such a twisted narrative and cast of characters came from playing games that praised him for killing so many enemies. He thought to himself, well, the only way that this makes sense is that if all the characters you play as is crazy. This idea spiraled into the insanity that we see in Drakengard. Something that truly took me by surprise back when I initially beat the game was how the first ending I got was so bittersweet, only to realize that out of the game's 5 endings, it was the most optimistic out of all of them. I won't get into spoilers, of course, but every other ending just gets progressively even more messed up, leaving the world in a worse state than before. While far from my favorite Yoko Taro game, Drakengard remains one of his most memorable, and this is due in large part to how oppressive the atmosphere felt and how bleak the world is. Now that I've sunken you into the depths of despair, you'll be happy to know that you've just experienced 10 Dark JRPGs and can finally breathe a sigh of momentary relief. But if that isn't enough for you, I'm sure the community can share some more. With that said, if you've got more Dark JRPGs to add to this list, I want you to post a comment sharing your picks and why people should play it. Now, it might not be exactly the pick-me-up that you expected, but I just outlined 5 reasons why you should be playing Ys 10 Nordics right now. I also posted a review of Romancing Saga 2 Revenge of the Seven, speaking of Dark JRPGs. You can find them all right here, so go check them out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.